Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This program is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it is sponsored by Camp Constitution, which, among other things, runs a wonderful family summer camp, and our camp is coming right up July 12th to the 19th, and if you want to learn more about that, you can visit the site at www.campconstitution.net. Well, we have a very special guest on. Are you there, Alex?
I'm here, Hal. Thanks very much for having me.
All right, great. Yes, well, Alex, I almost said Newman. I mean, Alex, the character on Mad Magazine. Alfred E. Newman, right? Yeah, Alex Newman, not Alfred E. Newman. Right. Alex is a contributing editor, writer for the New American Magazine, among many other things. He resides in Florida, but he's also the co-author of a very important book recently published by Rolton Daily called Crimes of the Educators. And Alex, well, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Hal. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, well, just a little update here. I had the privilege of meeting Alex this past Thursday. This show, by the way, will be airing Monday. This is recorded a day earlier. But Alex came up to Boston to meet Sam Blumenfeld, his co-author. Sam, who is in extremely bad health and not expected to live much longer, regrettably. But it was the first time you met Sam. You've been on, because you've known him from phone calls and reading his writings and collaborating with him that way. So I was very privileged to be able to help you meet him. But talk to me about the book itself. That's a strong title, The Crimes of the Educators. And I think it's important to point out that we're not necessarily talking about the school teacher at the high school or junior high school, but we're talking about people behind that. So just give us a little background on that.
Sure, and to address your point there, absolutely. Sam and I have both said repeatedly that the teachers here are, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, are just as much victims as the students who are being dumbed down in the schools. And we use the term crimes very deliberately. We knew it with strong language, but it's not hyperbole in any way. We argue, and I think show conclusively, that massive crimes are being perpetrated here against this nation, against our republic, and against individual children. And so we outlined a list of 6 specific, identifiable, prosecutable crimes that are being perpetrated and have been perpetrated against our children and against our nation by this cabal of educators, so-called educators, I should actually say. Maybe miseducators is a better term. But basically, the first and most serious one, of course, is treason. In 1983, Ronald Reagan put together a commission, the National Commission on Excellence in Education, and their conclusion was pretty startling, especially for a government commission. They said if a foreign power had imposed this system on us, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. And Sam and I argue that we should view it as an act of war. It is an act of war. Just because it wasn't perpetrated by foreigners doesn't mean that it's any less an act of war. And dumbing down the population of a country for the purpose of subverting its liberty and overthrowing its system of government is the very essence of treason on a massive scale in a way that, as far as we know in history, has never really been attempted before. Of course, dictators have seized control and then used education to solidify their grip on power. But here it was a tool to seize power and to overthrow the Republican constitutional liberty system that the founders bequeathed to us. And so that's, of course, the most serious crime. Then we have child abuse, which, again, is a very serious crime.
Alex, let me interrupt you a second. These educators that gave us this horrible public education or government education system did it deliberately. This wasn't a question of, gee, we got it wrong, we have to tweak a little bit, we made a mistake. We had a theory that we thought would improve education, but it didn't. And oh boy, we're sorry. But these people knew exactly what they were going to. They knew exactly what they were doing, and the result is exactly what they want.
Exactly. And we have the primary source documents showing that. We trace this back to John Dewey, who wanted to change America, fundamentally transform America, to use the language of the day today. And his plan was to turn America into a socialist, collectivist, communist-type utopia. And he even told us what he wanted to be the model for that, looking backward, a novel published by Edward Bellamy in 1888. And this was a fantasy of a communist America in the year 2000. And he thought that was great. He went to the Soviet Union to study their education system and see how they were so efficiently mass-producing atheists and collectivists. And he set out with a plan. We actually republished the outline of his plan to dumb down America in 1898. It was the primary education fetish. And he said, kids don't need to read. That's not that important. Let's focus first on socializing them and having them do social activities and become social organisms. And then later, maybe we can worry about reading, and then they can look at books and stuff like that. And the results, that we have today, the federal government did a literacy survey about 20 years ago, and they said 55% of Americans can barely read. So, this was deliberately engineered this way. John Dewey, and of course he was funded by the Rockefellers, and he had a lot of colleagues in his educator cabal that set out to take over government education in this country and dumb down the population. But they've been wildly successful to the point where now, we're graduating millions of children who can't even read their high school diplomas. It's a national disgrace, and it's a crisis, and the implications go far beyond just dumbing down children. I mean, we're never going to be able to sustain this experiment in liberty with a population that has been deliberately dumbed down to the point where many of them have trouble reading.
Now, John Dewey was one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto 1, that was in the early 30s, where, and didn't he say that the teachers have to use the classrooms much like ministers and pastors use the pulpit to promote humanism?
That's exactly right. And if you notice, this kind of philosophy absolutely pervades the education establishment from top to bottom. And so what I say is, they say we need separation of school or of church and state and so on, and that the schools need to be secular and not teach religion. Well, they are teaching a religion. It's just not the Christian religion that this country was largely founded upon. It is the religion of humanism. And to give you the listeners an idea of what Dewey had in mind, the first Humanist Manifesto that you mentioned, Humanist Manifesto 1, the very first plank of this says that we regard the universe as self-existing and not created. And, of course, the first words of the Bible, in the beginning, God created. So, obviously these two are inherently opposed and conflicting.
You mean in the beginning it wasn't talking about baseball? It was actually talking about creation?
Right, exactly, yep. And, the rest of this Humanist Manifesto is also saturated in collectivist ideology, and they say we need to get rid of private property. And, so these are very, very radical documents. And at the time when John Dewey was coming up with this quackery and this lunacy, this would have been absolutely abhorrent to people. And so in this essay that we reprinted of his, The Primary Education Fetish, he says change must come gradually.
By the way, that's printed in your book, but Camp Constitution reprinted that about a year ago, and Sam Blumenfeld wrote the foreword to it. It was Sam that requested that we do that, and it's available on the Camp Constitution bookstore on the website, so for just a few dollars. So just thought I'd let you know that. Although we want people to buy the book, and incidentally, it's selling very well. It's available on Amazon. I'm sure there are other outlets too. And you go to Amazon, I think it sells for about $25, $26.
That's the cover price. Yeah, Amazon has it for a little bit cheaper. I think they're selling it for, I think it fluctuates, $22, $21 more or less. And then all the big retailers are carrying it, at least online. I know Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Target, you can order it through any of those if you prefer those. But and then if you want autographed copies, you can get them through the WND Superstore, which is superstore.wnd.com.
Or they can come to one of your speeches, right, or lectures, right, and you'll be able to autograph their copy of their book too. We're very pleased to have you. You were only up for it was one day. I mean, one night. You got here Thursday. You went home Friday. And by the way, I'm with my friend Tricon Tom Moore here that drove you to the airport. So we were looking for another phone so he could get into the conversation here. So you got a little whirlwind tour. You got a chance to see Lexington Green and Concord. Here's a guy that travels around the world, but he's never been took much time in the Northeast. So we definitely want to get you back up here and at some point and give you a little more time to enjoy. Well, that's possible. Yeah, that's possible. That'd be great. So anyway, so getting back to Mr. Dewey and his Humanist Manifesto, and that publication, and that was published in what, 1898?
Right, exactly. Yep, in kind of an obscure journal at the time, the Forum. And he wrote in there that change must come gradually, because to force it unduly would cause a violent reaction and would jeopardize the final success of their plan. And so he understood full well that parents and teachers and taxpayers would never in a million years go for this kind of lunacy. They had to do it quietly, under the radar, taking over the teachers' colleges, sneaking their dumbed-down books, especially the reading materials, into the school districts. And, so it was done gradually. It was done very quietly. But, the evidence is all there. We have the primary source documents showing what his plan was, what his views were, what his agenda was. And, it's been a disaster for our country, and we need to fix it if we're going to save it.
So the first crime you would say is treason, and then you list, 6 crimes in the book?
Yeah, we have 6 crimes, yep. The other one's child abuse, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, fraud and extortion. I mean, if a businessman
let's
to
get
tell you...
on the child abuse. That's a serious charge, and I agree. In fact, I spoke recently to a lady who lives on Cape Cod, and her son was in high school, and the son went down to the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor says, "You are probably gay," and he referred him to a homosexual group outside of the school, which he attended. He actually started living that lifestyle. He was being fed anti-Christian, pro-homosexual material. He was totally alienated from his family. He had tried to commit suicide. Thankfully, and it was all because of the state, as well as the militant homosexual agenda working hand in hand. And now there's a couple of bill pending to be able to stop this kind of thing. Not just a militant homosexual group, but any outside group. So that's, to me, an example of child abuse.
And I mean, dumbing down a child is, if a parent were to deliberately harm their child's mind, and that's exactly what's going on in the schools here, they would be prosecuted for that. If you locked your kid in a room and deprived him of knowledge, you would be prosecuted for that.
Sam used the term menticide. He may have actually coined that term. The murder or the killing of a brain, of a person's brain, not in the sense where the person becomes a vegetable, but when you destroy that person's ability, the child's brain, the ability to think, the ability to learn, to read, and again, the person can function, but not function at the way the person was supposed to function.
That's right. And so we spent a long time focusing, a lot of time in the book, many chapters are devoted to this, exposing this reading methodology that was promoted by John Dewey called the whole word method, which today is used in government schools across the country. It's the backbone of the early reading sections in Common Core. The kindergarten Common Core aligned textbooks, for example, tell the kids to memorize words. And just to give listeners a brief overview of this for those who aren't familiar with the debate on phonics versus whole word. Phonics is the way our language has been taught since time immemorial, the reading and the writing of our language, because we have a phonetic alphabet. And so obviously you need to teach it phonetically. Each letter is associated with different sounds, and the different letters work together to make different sounds, like a CH will be pronounced a ch, like cheese or whatever. And so that's the way you learn how to read and write our language, because that's the way it's structured. And this was a huge advancement over, the pictographic and the symbolic written languages of past ages. So
the Chinese language is you have to learn each symbol, and each symbol stands for something, and there's a couple of thousand symbols. So it's really hard to master a language like that, especially unless you live in the culture and you're kind of around it all the time. So the look-say method, or it's called whole word or whole language, was, and I think in the book you talk about Reverend Gallaudet, who was the one that developed a system to teach deaf people with all the best of intentions, and thought, gee, maybe this would help people that aren't deaf. I mean, obviously
right.
Deaf people can't hear sounds. And this was back in the 1840s and 50s, and it was introduced into Boston. And after a couple of years, it was totally rejected because it didn't work. It was a disaster. And that's what happens when you try something. Okay, this may work. It doesn't work. You go on to something else. and then what was about 100 years before it was reintroduced.
Well, this was exposed as quackery in the 1840s, at least when it comes to teaching, non-deaf children.
That was about the same time phrenology came on, too, that the notion that you could look at the bumps on somebody's head and say, oh, this person has certain personalities, and that was sort of a quackery, too. And it's too bad that, no one seriously considers phrenology. They still consider whole language legitimate.
Right, and it's more evidence of Dewey's wicked intent here. I mean, this was known, this was proven to be faulty, to be ridiculous in the 1840s. And John Dewey and his cabal of criminals resurrected this, knowing full well what the effects would be. They had some of their colleagues produce supposed scientific papers showing that this was a good thing to do, Edward Huey Long, for example. But so they resurrected this, 60 years after it had been shown to be not a good way to teach children to read. And they eventually managed to get it into all the public schools. They took over the teachers' colleges. They produced things like the Dick and Jane readers and the Macmillan reading program. And again, this is being used today all across this country. And this is why we have the reading disaster that we have. And now modern science actually proves and shows what is going on in the brains of people subjected to this quackery. I mean, they've done brain scans of children who learn to read using the phonics method, and then brain scans of children who've learned to read using the whole word method. And what the brain scans show is that children who read using phonics, their brains are well developed. The left brain does what the left brain should do. The right brain does what the right brain should do. The connections between the two are seamless and properly functioning. In children who learn the whole word method, that's not the case. The connections are dubious at best between the two hemispheres of the brain, because you're trying to force the right brain to do a left brain function by memorizing words as if they were symbols rather than understanding the phonetic components of the word and thereby decoding the meaning of it. And so, we argue that this is child abuse. If a parent were to deliberately damage the mind of their child, they would be prosecuted for that, and rightfully so. But yet the government schools are doing this on a mass scale, on an industrial scale, and they're getting away with it because nobody understands what's going on. And so that's really one of the key themes and one of the key messages and takeaways for the book is we need to get back to teaching reading the correct way.
Now, Sam Blumenfeld, the co-author of your book, long advocated the idea that the look-say method created bad students and lack of attentiveness in the classrooms, and the solution, according to the educators, was to drug them with psychotropics because it wasn't the method of teaching, it was something wrong with the kid, it was what they were getting at home. So they introduced all these psychotropic drugs. So I think you mentioned that there's a chapter in the book dealing with that too, I believe.
There is, yeah, and there's several components and angles of this. First, we talk about dyslexia a little bit. Now, dyslexia, people don't really have an understanding of it. They think it might be some kind of biological or hereditary disease, and it's no such thing. It's a product. It's the fruits of teaching a child to read using the whole word method. It causes reading disabilities because it's a ridiculous way of learning how to read our language. And so then they diagnose these children as dyslexics, and then the parents can say, oh, nothing we can do, it's just some kind of problem in our child's brain. And it is this problem in their child's brain, but it was induced by the schools, and it can be fixed just through proper reading instruction. And then to the other point, you're absolutely right about the development of these psychotropic drugs, and that brings us to another one of the crimes that we identify in the book, contributing to the delinquency of minors. What they're doing here is, first of all, they're dumbing down the kids. They're preventing them from learning to read, and so the kids quite naturally act out, and they might not understand that they're deliberately being dumbed down, but they understand that something's wrong, and so they act out, and they don't pay attention, and they don't want to be there. And the education establishment and the psychiatric establishment, and all with help from the government, of course, deals with this by putting them on hard drugs. Now, if a parent were to give their child hardcore amphetamines just willy-nilly, that would be a crime. But when the school does it, when the psychiatrists do it, suddenly that's okay. And, these are really, really serious drugs.
Isn't it? It's a multi-billion-dollar business.
Oh, goodness. I mean, the money being made here by everybody is huge, except, of course, the taxpayers who are extorted to pay for all of this.
And they're paying for it. That's right.
Yeah, and I mean, the consequences of taking these kinds of drugs, I think parents aren't really, if they would just read the labels that come with these drugs, they would understand more fully what's going on here. These have potential for addiction, for long-term and maybe permanent damage and consequences.
Alex.
So, these are not toys.
Alex, so the joke around here is they send them to Dr. Slows them down.
Clozapine. That's good. Yeah. No, I mean these are hardcore drugs, and I think a lot of parents aren't aware of that. And even the diagnosis of ADD and ADHD. I'm not a psychiatrist, but these things are voted on. These are not objective, diagnosable things. It's not like if you break your arm, you take an X-ray and you see you have a broken arm, or you have a disease and you do a blood test and then you figure out what the disease is.
Right.
This is totally subjective, and I sometimes say it's quackery. I mean, these psychiatrists get together and they vote on what they think should be considered a disease, and a list of symptoms for the disease, and a list of drugs to treat the alleged disease. And this is totally unscientific in the sense that we traditionally understand medicine and science. And
what's ironic is that you go to one of these government schools and there'll be a big sign, drug-free zone, right?
Not really.
And actually, they just don't want competition. They don't want the hardcore drug dealer dealing with the illegal drugs. But it is not a drug-free zone. In fact, after the drug dealer says to the kids, "Hey, look," he said, I got something just a little bit better than what we've been giving you.
Yep.
Yep. It's a single dad, and his son is actually very smart, and he's doing quite well in high school. But when he was in elementary school, they evaluated him for Ritalin, and my friend said, "No, if there's a problem, I'll work with my son." And when my friend said no, here in the state of Massachusetts, they sent a social worker by his house to evaluate whether to take it away from him because he refused to put him on the drugs. That's how bad it's got.
Oh, there's a case like this in Detroit now where they tried to do this to a woman up there, and she refused, and so they sent a SWAT team with a tank to her house, and now they're on their fifth attempt to take away her child because she refuses to drug the child with these psychotropic drugs that the government and the schools want to give her. And so, we've reached beyond the point of absurd in this country when it comes to the drugging of children and these mandates by the government.
Well, I guess my friend should be happy. He just got a social worker as opposed to a tank in his front yard.
Yeah, he got off light, no doubt.
Yeah, so anyway, and that's happening in these government schools all over the country, in poor neighborhoods, in middle-class neighborhoods, in wealthy neighborhoods. And this is, of course, why Sam Blumenfeld always advocated get your children out of those government schools. He's been doing that all the last 30 years or so, maybe longer, and that's why he's one of the pioneers of the homeschool movement. Why so many parents, and what's interesting is that as I give presentations on this thing called Common Core, which your book addressed, we'll discuss in a few seconds, a lot of the parents are waking up all over the country, but some of them are offended because we're questioning their judgment. We're saying, you haven't figured this out by now. But talk a little bit about Common Core. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I know you can talk about 3 hours about Common Core. But you do have a chapter about Common Core in your book, of course.
Yeah, actually, we have several dealing with Common Core and related developments. And basically, this is just maybe not the final stage of the dumbing down agenda, because there's still one more step that they hope to accomplish, which is just out-and-out global standards. But the two most important things about these standards is, first of all, they're atrocious. Even the only two subject matter experts on their rubber stamp Common Core validation committee refused to sign off on the standards. Dr. Sandra Stotsky said that these English standards are terrible. You're taking out all the good literature. It's going to reduce the critical thinking abilities of children. You're replacing literature with Obama executive orders and EPA regulations, and I'm not signing off on this. It's terrible. Then you had, on the math component, Dr. James Milgram of Stanford, and he said, nope, these standards are terrible. They're as non-challenging as possible. They're confusing. The methodologies, some of them are proven not to work. Some of them are experimental. And get this, some of them are based on incorrect mathematics. And so, of course, Bill Gates and the Obama administration thought it would be great to roll that out across the entire country. Mm-hmm. Now, the second key point here, aside from, this is blatant dumbing down of children, is the problem that we're losing local control. And actually, to some extent, we've already lost it many years ago. But they're putting the final nail in the coffin here of local control over government schools. The local community is supposed to be in charge of the schools. The taxpayers who fund it are supposed to elect the school board, and the school board is supposed to decide things about the school. Well, under Common Core, you will have no ability to influence what is taught to your children, none whatsoever. You can't even lobby your federal representatives for help in changing this, because this is a project of special interests, of lobbying organizations funded by the federal government, like the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, and these standards are copyrighted, and you cannot deviate from them if you want to continue getting your federal funding. And so, we're losing
and the
local
tests
control.
actually, the teachers are actually more like facilitators, or the term standbys, and so they have nothing to do with the curriculum. It's not like that teacher has his or her own teaching guide that they use for the year. They can make adjustments, maybe they can improve, they can take things out, add things. It's just like a prefabricated curriculum. That's terrible. And the test, they don't even get the test back. Don't the tests go to some central location, and they don't even see the tests?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the tests, too, are a crucial mechanism here for the enforcement of this monstrosity. They're using them to enforce it both against the teachers and against the students. And in addition to that, they're being used to gather unimaginable amounts of data on the children. All of this is going to the Federal Department of Education in Washington, D.C. for use by bureaucrats and big business and the central planners who want to plan out the lives of all of our children. And so, in sum, we need to oppose this and we need to resist it. But there is, one benefit that I see from all this, and this is that it's getting parents all across the country, all across the political spectrum, totally outraged. And so we have an opportunity here to blow the lid off of this whole scandalous system designed to dumb children down if we seize the opportunity and use it correctly.
So I think this book, Crimes of the Educators, may be the thing that breaks the back, because people, like I say, and it's not a left-right. There's a lot of issues that are left-right, but this one, you get people on both sides of the spectrum really upset about it. And if they can look at the bigger picture, as you and Sam and people like Charlotte Elizabeth and many others say, this Common Core is just something. It's just another addition on top of some really bad things to begin with. Even if we got rid of Common Core tomorrow, the public government schools would be still pretty rotten. But I think it's a really opportunity. I was actually at a homeschool show not too long ago, and I had information on Common Core, and I asked a young lady who came by with some little children, have you heard of Common Core? She said, that's why we homeschool. And so that was a really encouraging thing to do this. So we think we have a minute left here, about a minute and a half. So
I mentioned that Hal and I were both part of the very first modern-day Tea Party, and our keynote speaker was Rand Paul. Dr. Rand Paul is coming back to speak exactly 1 week from today, and we're going to give him a copy of your book, sir.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you very much. And I saw yesterday someone gave it to Ted Cruz. So.
Ted Cruz. Now, let's just hope he reads it and puts it to work. But maybe other people around the country. Well, of course, New Hampshire is the first primary in the country, so all of the would-be presidents are running around the state. So we will do our best to get it in the hands of as many as possible. So again, the book Crimes of the Educators, and it's available on Amazon.com, and they can find you. You write for the New American magazine, thenewamerican.com. And what else? Where else could they find? You have your own website or blog?
No, my company has a website, but I also write for some other publications. If people Google my name, they can find stuff I've written. And yeah, thenewamerican.com is a good one. And if they want to find the book, again, just Google it or go to Amazon or find it whatever method you prefer. So.
Okay, excellent. So, you'd probably just do a Google search. You'll go to YouTube and put in your name, and you'll probably find some of your presentations. So, Alex, I want to thank you so much for being on. It was an honor to meet you, and we certainly hope that our paths will cross sometime soon.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you so much, Hal. It was an honor to meet you as well. I really appreciate it, and keep up the good fight. So, thanks very much.
We shall. God bless. You've been listening to Camp Constitution Radio on WBCQ The Planet, heard every Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, coming out of the beautiful town of Monticello, Maine.